Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to today's, or my first actually talk show on Let's Talk Politics in Guyana. And it is my pleasure to be here this afternoon. Previously, as you guys know, I'm only here on Saturday, but I'm bringing you this special edition. I'm bringing you this special edition of Let's Talk Politics in Guyana. And joining me this evening will be my colleague, Claremont Chung, an attorney licensed in the state of New Jersey and New York. We were also supposed to be joined by a third panel member who unfortunately is not here, but the show must go on with whoever we have here today. We will be discussing, first of all, the issue relating to the sanction that the US government has stated that will be issued against the Mohammed family and also against May Thomas, at the time she was the permanent secretary to the Minister of Home Affairs. So we will be discussing those issues today. And joining me now, it's Claremont Chong. Good evening, Claremont, and welcome to Let's Talk Politics in Guyana. It's my pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Shalon. Thanks for having me. I hope I can contribute sufficient for me and your guest who's not here.
Okay, great. So Claremont, today we'll be discussing an issue which has happened. I think it was published by the U.S. government on June 11th. The government of the United States has announced that it will be sanctioning the Mohammed family, and also at the time, the permanent secretary to the Minister of Home Affairs, May Thomas. As you know, earlier in the year, there was an issue with her when she attempted to enter into the United States and she was denied entry. Her phone was confiscated. And I guess an investigation was ongoing at that time where the US government was investigating allegations of corruption involving her and the Mohammed family, Azruddin Mohammed and his father. So at this point, I know we're going to be discussing some issues other than that related to the government of Ghana, their actions. But let's just talk just a few minutes about the United States actions against the Mohammed family and against Miss Thomas. What is your opinion regarding the United States? Do you believe that by confiscating the phone or otherwise that there was sufficient evidence? Because I know early in the year there was discussions as to whether or not the government had sufficient evidence to take any actions against her. So what is your take on that?
Well, my question, the question that jumps out at me is the question of sovereignty. And I believe the first question is whether the U.S. had sufficient laws in place, but sufficient of their own sovereignty to take someone's phone at the border. And I think you know as well as I that most countries, if not all of them, have specific rights once you're in the country. But when you're attempting to get into the country, those rights are significantly reduced. And they can do at the border what they couldn't do had she already entered. And a lot of people, while we are on the subject of entry, repeat for them that no one has the right to enter another country, except, of course, citizens of that country. So green card holders, for example, even lawfully admitted with unblemished records, when you're coming back to the United States, there's always that question. You don't have a right to entry. So just bear that in mind. So Ms. Thomas Toussaint was faced with that question when she was only in transit, is my understanding, between Guyana to China. And her phone was seized, basically. She was detained, and her visa revoked. I believe a few days later, we learned that her visa had been revoked. So that's well within the sovereignty established law of U.S. Immigration law, or U.S. Entry laws. And as far as I could tell, on its face, there was nothing untoward about that detention. Now, the further question is whether they can effect punishment for something that did not happen inside the US. And again, international law has been evolving, and now most things are global. We understand that things done in other countries could be punishable in another country if it affects the international law. I think in this case, is the Magnitsky Human Rights Act that they developed or codified in 2017. This
Right.
has been the case before, but 2017 is when they codified it and made it that abuse in one country could be punishable in abuse in other countries. That opens the door to a whole lot of things that we are now going to try to explore, and we'll see developing. Um, so under the Magnitsky Act, they can say, "Look, we'll do certain things. We'll prevent you from coming in." It's under the immigration law, and now I think they've seized some assets uh, uh, from not only Mohammed's, but prevented Miss Thompson Toussaint from transacting business it had to do with the U.S. And I think that too, uh, under this new fabric, is permissible. The real question, I think, is how is it that the U.S. is able to find this information, obtain this information, and act on it while the government in Guyana is unaware or seemingly unaware and could only act after the action of the U.S.
Right.
So that's where the sovereignty coming. Like, who is in control? Is it the U.S. or Guyana's
Or
government?
Guyana. And I think that's a really valid and important question, because the government of Guyana, I believe, ought to be very cautious and ashamed of themselves if this was going on. And based on the statement published by the State Department, it seems like millions of dollars. They said in excess of $50 million in taxes. So tax evasion was one of the issues where Guyanese were deprived of the value of what was being exported by the Mohammed family. And a bunch of other fraudulent conduct was taking place right under the government of Guyana nose. And it begs the question, is the government competent enough to watch over the country? Because if this is happening, $50 million in taxes on export gold and other valuable, they said, is how many thousands of kilograms of gold was being exported out of Ghana. No taxes paid on that. Why wasn't the government of Ghana not able to catch these things? Most importantly, why is the US able to investigate our country and the government who sits there, who claims that they're taking care, looking out for the best interests of the people in Guyana? They're not able to catch these things. So what is I mean, do you really think Guyana have any sovereignty here when it comes to looking over its own affairs and ensuring that the legalities of what actually takes place under the government is actually happening the way it should? If the U.S. government have to step in at some point and say, "Listen, there's corruption happening here." What do you think? Do you think Guyana is really sovereign?
Well, there are two things. There's sovereignty and there is corruption, right? So my position has always been, and it's not necessarily a popular one, but it's one that I hold true to because it explains a lot of the actions of both the U.S. and the Guyana government. Not just Guyana, there are other governments in the Caribbean, Africa, in the developing world uh, that we are still in a colonial system of of world politics, let alone local politics. And I'll get to those in a minute. But as far as world politics are concerned, we're still in a colonial framework. And in many respects, Guyana is still a colony. Now, it may not be a colony of England or the British Empire, but the US is an extension of the British Empire. And they won their independence through a revolution, 1776, that established the original 13 states and so on. But what has continued is a mindset that the world belongs to Europe, and that mindset has been transferred into onto the U.S., who now leads and is the head of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which we call, NATO, which is at war, of course, in the Ukraine. So if you understand that we are still in a colonial system, and that Guyana is in, for all intents and purposes, a colonial state, then you could understand how the U.S. can say, well, there's some injustice and some law breaking going on over there, and we're going to do take these steps to intercept and to prevent further damage. What they have not done is filed a complaint in Guyana's court or brought prosecutors. That would be the next level of colonialism, where they're actually prosecuting. But I imagine if the Mohammeds were to come to the United States, or arrive here, they could be interdicted and prosecuted. So the question of sovereignty to me is fairly, I've simplified it. We are a colonial state in Guyana, and don't take it personally. It's not just Guyana, it's the whole region is a colonial state. They affect who gets into power and who gets out of power. So if we don't see that, then maybe you should be on this discussion. But to me, that's very clear. This has been the historic process, right? So,
Right.
so can Guyana now act on this information? And why? The question is, why hadn't they acted prior to?
Right.
Well, we could only speculate that there had to be some kind of diplomatic communication that these things were going on. I don't think the U.S. would have acted so drastically without first informing the local politicians, the local government. But I don't know that for sure. So I'm not making those accusations. I'm just saying that in the light of this, then what do, of the loss of 50 million suggested or estimated, what then does the Ghana government done? And we've had little over 2 weeks, I think, from the date that the announcement was made.
Right. June
The,
11th.
right, and my understanding is that I haven't been sent official documents. My understanding is that the licenses of the Mohammeds to operate in the gold industry has been suspended, and there are other steps to be taken. Again, I can't confirm all of that. If that's the case, then certainly they're making steps, but it shouldn't have had to wait until the U.S. acted for local government to act. And so you'll always see in every discussion that we have about political development, economic development in Guyana, you will have to deal with the U.S. and their role, because we are, for all intents and purposes, a colony.
And I mean, just for the audience's sake, I just want to reference the what give the U.S. the authority to act the way they did is pursuant. The Department of Treasury took this action pursuant to an executive order 13818, which was built upon the implementation of global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act. So this is one of the act that the United States used to justify the actions that they have taken against Guyana, or the people in Guyana, the Mohammed family, more importantly, and May Thomas. So for those of you who are wondering what give them the right, or why did they act in this manner, but now you know that there was an executive order that was implemented, right, for this particular purpose. So anything that affects people, their human rights, because in this case, as you know, the tax evasion deprived the people in Guyana of valuable resources, which could go towards eliminating poverty, eliminating certain conditions in the country. So I think people ought to be aware of this. All right. So back to you now, Claremont. As it relates to let's go back. Let's go back now to the sovereignty, because as you know, there was an interview between Stephen and President Ali. Well, I shouldn't say President Ali, but but there was an interview, and certain things were said as to why he took whatever actions he took. But what I want to ask you, let's go a little bit into that interview and let's dissect it. Could you tell the audience a little bit about your take in terms of your analysis on what was said, And
Right.
how did the president of Ghana went about this? Do you think he took the right angle? Did he act it correctly? Or should something different should have been done? Should he have followed the United States and as soon as the United States act, he acted like I don't know what to say. But what is your take on this?
Right. So a lot of what President Ali, and for all intents and purposes, we know the elections were fair. I have no evidence to the contrary. Um, and by we call him by his rightful title. Um, a lot of what he said were important. A lot of it was true. He had obviously been prepared for this interview and prepped by his assistants, which professionals we have to do. You just don't come on and speak off the top of your head, and so this is expected. I thought on that level, uh, he was fairly well prepared. However, he was prepared by people who were uninformed in many respects, and perhaps not. They may not be at my where I stand, which is that we're still in a colonial setting, and so they were expressing thoughts as if they were actually in control of the resources of Guyana and their value, which they are not, because if, as a practical matter, on the most base level, if I owned something, if something belonged to me, then it would be cheaper for me to use that. If it's a commercial product, it should be cheaper for me to use it than anyone else. So if the price of oil was going down at the pumps in Guyana, then we can say, oh, we own this. And as a consequence, we're benefiting directly. Forget about the cash that's coming or not coming. We all depend on oil. It's the system that we live in as our energy to drive our cars, machines, and so on. And if it's not cheaper for us who they say own it, then the question is, do we really own it? And so at that very base level, you're really challenging this question of sovereignty, and certainly sovereignty over the resources of the country. So perhaps Mr. Ali, President Ali, should have begun there. Why is it not cheaper for locals to fill up at the pump and to organize themselves in there? Why is it not cheaper for them and consistent electricity being available to the citizens of Guyana if oil is cheaper? You see, if it's cheaper for us, if it's ours, we should have it consistently. That's not happening. So a lot of what he was saying was well prepared, but it was grounded in a misconception of whose resources these really were, and whether and again coming back to the question of sovereignty. So again, he said important things, but the part that stood out to me was the part that my friends sent me, where he stopped. We're talking about Stephen Secor, the interview with Stephen Secor, Hard Talk on the BBC, and the listeners could go check it if they haven't seen it. I'm sure it's been sent all over to everybody who's even remotely related to Guyana. And I think my friend sends it to me as as a good example of Guyana standing up to imperialism, standing up to colonialism. But I didn't see it that way at all. I was kind of stunned, not by so much by what he was saying in the beginning and challenging colonialism as I do. All right, I'm challenging colonialism, challenging imperialism, and then he says that Stephen Shakur pointed out that um, that Europe and developed nations had used up all of their forests and shouldn't be lecturing him, and that up until now, Guyana had preserved, according to him, 80% of its forest, and therefore Europe should not be telling them how to use the oil, the carbon that's going to be uh, released
Emitted
into the
into.
atmosphere as a consequence of the processing of oil and the use of oil coming out of Guyana. And I was stunned by that idea. And some of my friends, I'm like, how could my friends, people who I respect, see that as an important thing for him to say. And the reason why I thought it was a ridiculous idea was that he is challenging, and rightly so, the idea that Europe and other developed nations were able to develop through the Industrial Revolution to where they are now. And therefore they should not tell Guyana how to go forward. That's one thing. But for that those development actions, that exploitation that Europe and America has brought upon the world, to be the same model that you are going to use in Guyana, that you are going to then do the same thing that they had done, that you had the right then to develop fossil fuels, to introduce more carbon into the world, to destroy your own forests if you wanted to. That that is a very, very unfortunate statement, and that's where I think they were prepared, but from an incorrect position.
But you see,
And
I don't know, Clement, if they actually prepared him to say that, or maybe that was just unscripted.
I think from my assessment personally, he was waiting for that question. That's why he stopped Stephen Sako, and he
Right,
wanted to make that point. And it would have been a great point in the attitude to it and so on was fine, except that a couple of unfortunate things. You uh, they say two wrongs don't make a right.
right,
If Europe
exactly,
destroyed their forests and polluted the world with using fossil fuels, how does that give you a right to do the same? That
exactly,
is the most parochial and insular understanding of world geopolitics. And as a simple example for us is his reference to Guyana not using up 80% or still having 80% of its forest. Now,
right.
the Amazon forest as a whole and Guyana's forest, it's not Guyana's alone. You
Yeah,
see,
it's
this
not.
is the thing. We're thinking that somehow this forest belongs to Guyana. You want to be international, and then you want to be insular when it suits you. You want to be global and participate in the world politics, and then you want to be insular when it suits your position. The Amazon forest on the whole produces 40% of the world's oxygen, clean air.
Right,
Now, 40%, which means people in Europe, and he pointed this out, I think implicitly, America, Africa depend on the Amazon for air to breathe. So then what gives you the right to cut down any of that forest, even if it's in your country, uh, to affect the breathability of the world's air? It's the same position that Europe had when they began the process of dividing up the world among themselves, claiming states, making the world into colonies. It's the same idea that this whole thing belongs to me. And here, Ali, and this is part of our problem as subjects, as colonial citizens, we adopt we adopt the thinking of the very same people whom we resent for the history of colonialism. We adopt their thing. That's how we train. We go to their universities and we come out with the same ideas of development in that industrialization, machines, gasoline, fossil fuels is our right. And we have to be, I think, better. I think our universities need to be putting out better minds who can see the debt that oil has brought to the world, and not just look at cars and the developments that it has brought. When we talk about they talked about slavery in that conversation as well. I think it was
yes, I
Stephen
remember.
Sako who brought it up.
Yes,
And Ali again, and rightly so, Ali asked him, "What if I ask you for my reparations now? Would you would you pay it?" Well, Stephen was not prepared for that. But we can see clearly if you have a ship with black bodies in the hold of it, now we could say that's slavery, that's injustice, that's wrong. We weren't saying, those Europeans weren't saying it back then. Well, some were, but the majority of Europeans, well, this was normal. This was the law. You could go to Africa, kidnap some people, bring them to Guyana, force them to work, take whatever they produce, sell it, don't pay them anything, barely keep them alive with the least of this was the law. This is the problem with the law. You see, not because it's a law, I mean it's the best for all humanity. So we can, but today we know that black bodies in the whole of a ship is a bad thing. We don't see black crude in the whole of a ship as a bad thing. We see it as energy, as the, maybe not the future, but it's what runs the world. The same way that black bodies ran the world 150 or 60 years ago. It's the same thinking. And when we understand that, then we are able to analyze the meaning of the contract, right? The Esso, Exxon, Sinnock, Hess, Chevron contract that is running Guyana's oil operation now. That is why no price is going down at the pump, because
Right.
it's a colonial construction.
Right. I mean, we know very well neocolonialism is a big part of what's happening in a lot of the countries that are considered underdeveloped countries. So those countries really do not have the right to make certain decisions for themselves. So just looking back at the decision that the United States took against the Mohammed family, the government of Guyana would have never taken those steps anyway, because the Mohammeds are very good friends with President Ali. They're also very close friends with May Thomas. So, and their husband, they're all very close friends. So there was absolutely no way that the government of Guyana would have taken any actions, and they know very well that they couldn't have interfered with the Mohammed's business, or how they operate, how they choose to operate their business. There's no way they could have penetrated that. So they had to sit there and deliberately wait for the United States to take steps, which I think part of the evidence came from May Toussaint's phone, I believe, at the time when they confiscated that phone. I'm just speculating because I don't know for sure. We don't have any evidence because the United States did not publish its findings from her phone. But I imagine the United States would not act without sufficient evidence to prove that they have the right to take these actions against her. As I said, those actions were taken based on an executive order, which give them the right to take certain actions against certain foreign personalities or foreign businesses, I'm assuming. So that's why they took those steps to hand the sanctions down. And I think it's really shameful. I know you're not the one to really speak on this, but I think it's shameful that the Guyana government sat there under this type of corrupt practices and allow it to continue for a very long time, and no actions were taken. And until the United States decided, well, we're going to take actions. And when they took actions, then Guyana decided that they're going to act. But it's a shame. It's a shame because their actions doesn't mean anything now. It doesn't carry any weight because you must have known that this was happening right under your nose. You must have understood that the Mohammed family is running corrupt businesses in Guyana, and nothing was done to correct that situation. So at this point, Claremont, I think it's a half an hour program. So if
Oh,
you want to
wow.
make any closing remarks about it before we
Yeah.
go, but
Well,
we're
that
it's
was
almost.
the U.S. intervention was an opportunity for President Ali to talk about the hypocrisy of Europe and America when he challenged Stephen Sikor about Europe's hypocrisy to tell him and Guyana what to do. This was really his opportunity to say, wait a minute, we're going to handle this ourselves. You don't tell us what to do. This is the hypocrisy because you're involved in the very same things yourself. You have people in your own country. You have a president, someone who's running for president has been convicted. You go take care of that. You're not even handling that. So you're coming all the way here to handle this. This is our purview. Let's handle this. he hasn't done that. So maybe he will. It's still very early. Maybe the government of Guyana will take it into control and do right by the people finally, because that's what politics is. Politics is power of the people.
Well, as you know, there's no power in the people of Ghana's hand at this time, and we're hoping for some sort of changes to come to the people of Ghana. We're hoping and we're praying that some sort of changes will eventually come, at least in the next elections. We're hoping, we're standing by and we're observing what's happening, and maybe by some sort of luck, the elections will be fair this year, and there'll be no meddling from any international bodies or even meddling from internally in Guyana itself. So we're hoping that it will work out and there will be some sort of changes, and it needs to happen really quickly, so that things can turn around and Guyana could truly stand up and be a sovereign country, like maybe Burkina Faso, or some of the African countries who have begun to stand up for their rights and recognize that they need to take back control over their power, take back control over their country, and become a real sovereign country. So
Mhm.
I think we just have to hope. All right.
Yes. Well, I guess our time is up. We could go on for a long time, but we'll stop there.
Yes.
I'll come back another
Anyway, Anyway, Clement, thank you so much for us being here live tonight to discuss politics in Guyana. This was an issue that we wanted to discuss for a while, the actions taken by the United States government. Thank you so much for your time. And I know the listeners of yours will appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you, guys, all of you, for joining us tonight. I am your host, Attorney Shellen Washington, attorney at law. I bring you my program every Saturday. So tomorrow I'll be live again at 4 o'clock to discuss the law and you. And this is my colleague, attorney at law, also Claremont Chung. It was our pleasure keeping your company for this half an hour on a Friday night. Good night, guys, and be safe out there.
Thank you.